All right, I am going to show you how to paint trees today by starting to show you how not to paint trees. Okay, so this is how we don't want to paint trees, and we don't want to use, remember, this green that I want them to look like circles, lollipops, stacks of triangles. Okay, this is at its most simple. Okay, it definitely it turns out that doesn't look very realistic. And then, okay, not only did I use the bad green, but if I come in here now and give them all trunks using black, we have, something that looks more like, I don't know, suckers, candy, lollipops. Completely realistic looking trees is what that is. That's how you made trees when you were in elementary school, okay? Or maybe that would be great trees for wrapping paper, but we want to make realistic looking landscapes. We're not going to make trees that look like this. Instead, we are going to make trees, one of the blues and the yellow that you have in your palette. And these are just for practice. So this you could do on the back side of one of your landscape practices. You're gonna want to paint a sky on a sky and a ground, or use one of your sky and grounds from the other day. So you can start just by working with just a back. That totally works. On the back, you're gonna get some yellow wet. So wet. I have my blue wet, and I'm going to I'm going to start with yellow actually. And this is going to be pretty loose. And I'm going to just highlight of the tree, and trees are really irregular shaped. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some blue. A little bit of blue. The bottom side of this. I want to make sure that I leave sky in a solid shape, and I'm letting my watercolor blend together like wet into wet. Okay, I can get a little more water if I don't feel like the color's drifting quite enough, but I'm definitely in my paint so that I can add tree trunk. So remember, to make black or brown, you use this reddish, orange, you want to look at it, and you mix it with the blue. And so I can mix it back and forth. You can see already I have a nice black gray. I can make it a little more brown by the orange in there. Now I have too much orange in there. Put a little bit more of my blue in there. Okay, in the meantime, my tree has set up a little bit, and kind of waiting for some of the shine to come off this paper so that I can put a tree trunk on here without too much drift of water. So I'm going to start underneath, and I'm going to just barely hit the green, and that's going to put just a little bit of a shadow of my trunk out into my leaves. The trunk doesn't have to be completely straight. It can get a little wider as it hits the bottom. And then I can use the very tip of my paintbrush here to make tiny little branches. So just barely trying to, hit the edge of my paintbrush. You can see I hit a little too much there. I have a giant black section in my tree here. I'm just going to pull that out with a little bit of paper towel. I can also pull out just a little bit with my paper towel, a little bit of texture on my tree trunk if I want. So you can see I lifted a little bit of the color. And now what I'm going to do, let's see if I can zoom in here. Does not want to zoom. Using the tiny end of my paintbrush, I'm just going to try to get a couple, And you should try not to bump your watercolor, but I'll show you how you can fix that. Couple of branches up here in this sky section, right? In these sky spaces. So those sky spaces, when you're working on one of your landscapes, will show blue through, right? Because you're working on a sky. And all I did now was clean my brush off and dry it off, and I can clean up some of that extra black that I got on there from the branches. I also can mix up a little bit of a really bluish tree, which will kind of add to the little G space that just went on there. So you can see I'm adding some darker spaces on my tree just to give it that like sense of depth, some three-dimensionality of those flubs with the branch. You guys could leave your a little bit before you put the branches on there, and then you wouldn't have so much drift into the wet watercolor. And then the last thing I can do with a little bit of extra water, can put a shadow under my tree, because it turns out trees leave a shadow on the ground down at the very end of my watercolor paper, so I don't have a ton of room to come forward a little bit with the shadow. But you can see all of a sudden my tree looks distinctly on the ground. So that's how you tree using a branchy kind of tree, a leafy kind of tree. So I could do the same thing and have it be a little bit more upright shaped, or I could do the same thing and have it be fall colored. So I'm going to do a little more upright and a little more fall color. So there's that kind of golden yellow that you have. Not the lemony yellow, but the other one. And then I'm using some of that, the orange red, and I'm just going to add that on here. I hit a little bit of the blue on my palette, so it kind of turned brown, which is actually a-okay. And you'll notice as I do the side and a light side a little, the tree will have the sun hit it the same as anything else, and one side will be lighter and the other side will be darker. So this is all tree, you just same process. I'm kind of jabbing the color on there, letting those colors mix wet into wet on my paper. And now the same thing again for the trunk. I'm going to come back to my paint that I had mixed up before with my blue and that orangey red. And I'm just going to add some branches on here and a trunk. I have a little bit, oops, shorter trunk on this one. And then up inside the tree in my like kind of sky spaces, I'm gonna put a couple of little branches in here. And you'll notice I do kind of intentionally sometimes hit the leaves when they're wet. It's like I said, that little bit of shadow that drifts in there, and especially now that I'm making a fall colored tree, that just all makes sense for the tree itself. And then again, I can put a little more water in my paint and shadow, and then now we have this idea of fall, right? And I could have actual leaves out on the ground of my tree. So there you have the type of tree that has leaves both summer and fall. The biggest thing to remember is that you need light color for either, and that the shape should be irregular and you're leaving sky holes. All right. The other kind of tree that we can work on is a pine tree. Now, pine trees are triangular, but they're not evenly triangular. And then green, but again, not evenly green. So just like when I started with the tree with no leaves, I'm going to start first, excuse my lightest color. I'm going to work my way from the top down. And I'm just kind of making a jagged line as I go. Pine trees tend to be kind of branchy and irregular. They get a little wider as they get to the bottom. A little wider as they get to the bottom. And this was with the same color green the whole way down. Like a zigzag, zigzag, zigzag as I go down the length of my tree. getting a little bit wider each time. That one will be behind. Now I'm going to mix up a really dark blue green and mix in just a tiny bit of that kind of black gray because I need a shadow color. Some you can put a little bit of trunk in here, but you'll see I'm going to the darker color on the underside of my branches. Hint of a trunk without actually needing to draw really a trunk. We don't a lot of times see trunk on a pipe. This one, because it's behind the other one, I'm going to have it be a little darker. Oh, that got really dark. Can kind of put some of that brown black down the center there to my more blue green here. And I'm just working so that my paint is wet enough it drifts. I want that watercolor to drift. I want to use the water to do part of the painting for me, okay? I have to direct the paint. I have to get it to go where I want it to go. But at the same time, I don't want to fuss with it too much. So I can put a little darker shadows here on this back tree to get it to behind the tree that's in front. So the tree in front is a little lighter colored. Just like the other trees, I can go ahead and put some shadow here on the ground. And ta-da, you have pine trees. So I know that looks really dark. There we go. Now you can see a little bit more of the green. If I want a little more texture, like I worked kind of fast and my colors are all blending together, I can come back and I can lift a little with my paper towel and just get a little bit of a hint of some texture until it dries, and I can go back and I can add a little bit more as well. Okay, so those are the two trees. So you can go ahead and practice with those on one of your landscapes after you've practiced with them just on blank paper. So if you practice a few times on a blank or on the back side of some of your landscapes from the other day, you then can go ahead and add one of them to a landscape to give your landscape trees. Now, if I were to be painting a group of trees in a landscape, so if I have a sky painted and I want a group of trees at the back, remember anything that's at the back is grayer and bluer. So I would have, we talked about this a little bit yesterday, that in order to have a group of trees at the back really look a ton like trees, they would look more like this, just lumpy. I can have them have some highlight and shadow, but they're mostly blue. We have a series of blue-green lumpinesses back here. And this, in my landscape, will give me the effect of trees in the distance. Particularly if I come back now and I can add those two trunks there, and I can add some shadow again using my blue with the orange. And this is a little wet still for this, but I can add these shadows in. As this dries, I could maybe add another little trunk in here. I don't need to. This is the far distance, right? I wouldn't necessarily see much in the way of detail back here, but this will feel now like a line of trees in far distance. And I can do this first on a landscape and then bring some grassy color in and add a bigger tree after this dries to the front section of this landscape. So you see I've put some front brighter green grass in. I'm trying really hard right now not to hit that darker color. I'm gonna have to go back and touch that up. Too much. So I'm gonna let that dry for a little while, but you can see that that starts to look trees in the distance a little bit. The other thing that we can do is paint a forest. So if I turn my paper sideways, I can quickly just draw a tree trunk. I'm going to have it go all the way off the paper. And then I'm thinking right now in terms of a birch tree, right? They get gradually gradually smaller, and they usually grow in trunks of 3. So I have just 3 kind of wobbly lines. So 1, 2, 3 trunks of tree on here. I am now going to paint around those trunks with kind of a random smattering of some sky back here. So I'm going to paint a little bit of blue, so that the tiniest feeling of that we can see some of the sky on this summer day in the forest. I'm going to take So I have sky now. You see that I skipped my trees as much as possible. I painted a little bit on this one, so I can come back with a little bit in a dry paintbrush. I'm going to have to paint a shadow on my tree anyway, so it turns out it's going to work out just fine. And now, trees in the forest, summer. I'm going to start with yellow, and I'm actually going to start with yellow that actually just even overlaps a tiny bit of the sky that I've just done. And I'm going to go in patches for just part of the way down the page. We got a little bit here, no big deal. Got to sneak in between these two. So I'm just trying to paint a little bit of yellow green right up to the sky, right onto the sky. Just some of the way down, and a little bit more yellow on this side where I had a little bit more of the sky, right? A little bit more sunshine in the forest. Now I'm going to mix up kind of a brilliant green color that's still pretty bright, and I'm going to just overlap that. Brilliant green. I can do some splattering, but green down. So the further down my paper I'm going to go, the darker my green is going to get, so that I start to have this sensation of foresty shadows. But every time I'm moving up, I'm also coming back and dropping some drips up in the last color. We want kind of that feeling, like I said, summer day in the woods. I am going to grab some really dark blue-green now. I start to feel like some of those woods. I'm going to switch to my kind of black color. The darker the shadows are in like a woodland scene like this, the sunnier the day will look. So I'm working fairly quickly. I want my paints to mix and blend together. I want there to be a variety of color back here. Again, you want it to look like fall. You could go ahead and use more of those yellows and oranges. You can start to see that my trees are starting to be isolated now from all of the cotton on here. I can use a paper towel if I like and add some texture to my hypothetical forest here. So I can lift out a few lighter areas. I can do a little more splatter. So if I get some yellow again, I can splash that yellow down here into some of my darker areas. And that will just look a little like leaves or some sort of flower. For my foresty floor here now, I'm going to get brown. Again, that is the blue mixed with the orange. I'm going to overlap right in the green and the that I've already got there. Going to switch to a little bit of yellow now. Try to lighten this up a little bit. So I have now a little bit of sky, yellow leaves at the top. It gets gradually darker here towards my forest floor. And you can see that I have my kind of trees here. Before my paint like dries all the way, I'm gonna grab some of this dark gray and I'm gonna just come back here into this background area. And I'm going to give myself a few branches, not on the birch tree, but like trunks, sticks, this sort of thing. Again, while the paint is still wet, so it's kind of blending together, that I don't have branches back there. This guy got a little high. It's above my leaves, above the leaves. So what I can do is grab a little yellow, this bright yellow paint, and do some, a couple of splashes so I can kind of add some leaf action to that tree up there too, because I'm gonna want that feeling of leaves on my birch tree. Although birches a lot of times don't have leaves until closer to the top. All right. This can dry a little bit. Probably even dry until tomorrow, really, because we're gonna need to do branch detail and shading on the tree. Let's see. This feels a little bit dry enough. Okay, so I've got my line of trees in the background, and I want to paint a tree here. Let's say that starts at here and goes to here. So I'm gonna do the same thing that I did before. I'm gonna grab my yellow and I'm just gonna paint right over the top of everything, okay? Leaving sky holes, painting right over the top of those dark trees for my background, and you'll see that green just starts to lift right up. It's gonna blend right into this tree that I'm making now. I'm gonna stop about right there because I want room for my trunk. I'm gonna switch to a little bit darker green. So I'm just adding some of the blue